This is an OpenChain education workgroup meeting, and we're going to be going over some issues that were raised asynchronously. So we're going to be looking at something that came in over the weekend, and we're going to see if some of those issues can be easily solved to bring something to market. We're focusing on the supplier education leaflet. Now, before this meeting begins, as always, we will show the antitrust policy notice. The full antitrust policy can be found on the Linux Foundation website. And if you're from an LF member company, you can ask questions of our counsel, Andy Updegrove. Our agenda today is a single item. It's the supplier education leaflet, and I will screen share that now. This is a document that was created almost 5 years ago by the OpenChain Japan workgroup. It was built out of various ideas and lessons learned in the supply chain. And the goal was to help suppliers begin using open source in a way that was going to match expectations around compliance. This particular document, as a 5-year-old artifact, references primarily our first standard, ISO 5230, and focuses on open source license compliance. As we prepare the second edition, the focus will also include more around security because, of course, we published ISO 18974 for security in December of last year. I see Jacob has joined, so I'm just going to put a link to this document into the chat so he can sync up as well. The supplier education leaflet's current format in Markdown is pretty basic. The original version was written as text, but then it was prepared into a document which was designed for printing. So I'll give an example of that by showing a finished edition of this in English. I'm just sharing this finished edition now. So the text was formatted into a printed guide for suppliers that looked something like this. And the idea would be to do something very similar with what we have now. So we work on the text, and then we look at formatting it into a leaflet for printing and sharing with the supply chain as a whole. That's some context which will help us when looking at issues around this, because one of the questions to ask, of course, is why so much text? And the answer is that it's split into sections in a printed document that might be handed around in a company. Now, over the weekend, we had a pull request from Steve Kilbane in the UK, basically picked up on some typos and other items like that. I'm just putting the pull request into the chat for reference. His pull request was definitely uncontroversial, focused on catching small items like missing spaces, capitalization, and so on and so forth. In this pull request, there's no changes to the content or the structure of the document. In that sense, we'll just merge this pull request. But additional to the pull request, he had 5 comments that we will look at in this call briefly. So I'm going to mark the review good fix. I'm going to approve this review to the document. Okay, I'm going to merge the pull request. And there we go. All right. So the pull request is done. He brought up 5 comments that I think are worth looking at, and they may need some feedback. So the first one is under typical open source licenses. The first one is the comment that whether software should be treated as open source or handled some other way should be determined by agreement between the software supplier and the recipient. Now, Steve asked a question. He said, this seems to suggest that if the license is not on the OSI list, supplier and recipient can agree to ignore the license. This is an interesting comment. I'm going to just make a note here that I read the intent of this sentence as saying that whether something or not is open source is determined by the companies in the transaction. And Steve's concerned that if something's not on the OSI list, the supplier and recipient could agree to ignore the license. And the challenge here is whether the agency, the authority to determine what is open source in a transaction, lies with the parties making the transaction or a third party, the OSI, and how that should be described. I actually think that it's reasonable for the 2 parties in the transaction to decide what is open source to them using whatever definition that they choose. We want them to use something like the OSI definition or the free software definition. But there are other licenses which are, let's say, open source adjacent, that they might bundle under their open source policies and rules. On the other hand, there could be software that goes under different policies and rules and goes to a different part of software asset management. So I think that having the 2 parties in the transaction determine what is open source is reasonable, but we might want to improve the wording. And I just wanted to check, if you had any comment on that, and perhaps I'll show you what I mean. When it comes,
Yeah, I
go ahead.
agree with you that we probably shouldn't determine the definition of open source. The 2 parties, I completely agree with you that the standard should be, or sorry, the education material for the standard should be open for interpretation of the 2 parties actually making the agreement.
Yeah, I think we have to do that. Otherwise, a third party, which wouldn't be part of, let's say, the contractual engagement, would be defining the terms of the terms of the transaction itself, which is fine in the case of law, like the government can do that. But in the case of an interested third party, like another company or an NGO, unless they actually own the intellectual property at hand, what they say probably falls under the category of advice. Yeah. This means that using a baseline, I'm just going to try and describe it here. Okay, so and I know that this sentence I've just written, a baseline like the OSD or FSD can be useful for clarity, but is not a hard determination per se between the parties. That would be controversial to some people, I think, because they'd say it should be. And that's the difference, I think, between should and is. The open source definition or free software definition does not have power under law unless you're dealing with a document that explicitly says that it must be used. But we want to somehow say that open source isn't just sticking a pin in the wall and hoping for the best. So maybe we can improve the sentence by considering how could we include OSD or FSD in this sentence without making it ungainly. Let's say whether software should be treated as open source or handled another way. I'm trying to reduce the amount of words. Should be determined. Let's say is usually determined by agreement between the supplier and the recipient. I said is usually there because we don't know. There might be a license out there that cheerfully proclaimed it's open source, but only according to this third-party listing, et cetera, et cetera. Someone could put a clause in. And here is where we can potentially add actually using the okay. So this basically then takes the wording directly out of ISO 5230, referencing the open source definition, free software definition, or similar. And the or similar was put there because Open Source Initiative and Free Software Foundation are two parties with tremendous influence over the ecosystem. But again, they're not a force of law. And there's other parties which might have licenses that they think are valid that aren't on either of those lists. And they could make claims that, well, yes, but this is open source. And that's not our fight to fight. So would it make sense then to go from this sentence, whether such software should be treated as open source or handled some other way, should be determined by agreement between the software supplier and the recipient, into whether software should be treated as open source or handled another way is usually determined by agreement between the software supplier and the recipient, potentially using the open source definition, free software definition, or similar. And maybe we can even reduce that, take out the or handled another way. And yeah, what do you think? Does that make sense? Is that an improvement or does it just make it more confusing?
No, I think it's an improvement. And then the qualification language of is usually and potentially, yep, that's good for education material.
That's great. I'll tell you what then, let's close this. Oh, I should add an edit. Original update. So I'm just adding in here that we are done. I do apologize. It's quite dusty here and I'm coughing a bit. That's good. So what I'll do is I'll update the original document a little bit later with a pull request. We do have another issue or two. Okay, this is an interesting one. Steve, should there be a comment about White House executive order, CRA, demands from regulated industries, etc.? I think the answer is definitely yes. What, what do you think?
It definitely gives teeth to a US based audience. Yeah, it's a strong driver.
And there's a related one, which is, yeah, another one. While we're discussing info that needs to be provided in the document, should we just refer to NTIA minimum requirements? I think the answer is just refer to no, because the US is influential, but it's only one part of the planet. But refer to yes, because it's important. Maybe we can combine these two and have White House executive order, CRA, regulated industries, NTIA minimum requirements, all bundled into an additional sentence. And that might allow us to add something into it, as you should pay attention to blah, blah, blah. I think that might fix it. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if was there an international audience that kind of echoed it as well that we could reference to make it more global, or is this pretty much the de facto standard?
At the moment, I think the White House executive order very influential in the sense that companies selling into the US, but it didn't have a tremendous amount of impact globally. NTIA minimum requirements seem to have been picked up a lot more. So people, for instance, I've noticed in China cite them more. And I think that's because it's not the White House or someone else's government saying to do something per se. It's someone trying to define how would you do procurement in a practical way into important systems. So yeah, I think the executive order, high knowledge, NTIA, very high knowledge. And then CRA over in Europe seems to also have had an impact. I think referring to them all would be helpful. Maybe we should put in like links to them because maybe maybe in 2 or 3 years people won't remember won't remember where they are. But I think they might have institutional knowledge about them. And there's also, as well as the CRA, there's one in Europe, Product Liability Act, I think. And I mean the US has genuinely been at the forefront of thinking here. Product Liability Directive in the EU. Okay, I'm just pulling up. Here we go. I'm pulling up this documentation to try to, and I don't expect anyone to read this here, but let's see, process of revising Product Liability Directive. Okay, that's weird. I hesitated and made a strange sound there because I don't like linking to PDF fact sheets because people tend to delete them and move them after a while.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point.
Let's pull back here. Here we go. Proposal for the oh gosh. So I'm an EU citizen and I apologize on behalf of my governance structure for making everything as difficult as possible. Yeah, I have to give big credit to NTIA and CISA and stuff. They're pumping out all the material on web pages that we can easily reference. Okay, let's see if I can find something. There's Europa, wonderful. This is the oh dear God, I haven't updated it since I was a college student. Europa is the library of European Union stuff. Okay, I'm gonna go right back to the main page, and I'm just gonna put this in here, and I'll just put down the Product Liability Directive, and the revision is 2022. So I'll just put a link. I'll go back to the original document, and yeah, under CRA, I'll just make a note, 2022 draft provision. All that effort for a link no one in the entire universe will ever check. I'm not sure where the
That being said, I like the idea of linking to um, articles where you're drawing your facts from. Is that the right format where you're putting links with, 1, 2, 3?
Oh,
It very
yeah.
much resonates like Wikipedia, right? But is this something where we need to translate it a bit for Markdown? Is this like the standard for GitHub, or
Oh, no, this is just I can we can genuinely say this is just me filling out the issue. The formatting is totally gonna need more.
okay, so there's probably going to be another pull request for formatting then. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. So the White House executive order, I got it as well. Ooh, their website's really nice. been a while since I went to the White House website. It's very fancy. That's so clever. The information is well put out. That's really nice. Let's send a memo to the European Commission to go and have a look. All right.
Underneath, they still link to a PDF, I think.
Yeah, NTIA had that one too. We had yeah, here we go. NTIA, they do describe it, but there is a PDF here. Maybe it's just how governments work. That's okay. We forgive them. Yeah, so we've got this CRA. Oh, the CRA I didn't pull in. I actually had that mislabeled. I'm just fixing our issue. Okay, product liability directive. So I'm just going to try and find the best place for the CRA. Is the CRA causing resonance in the United States? I imagine it is. Probably. Okay. Should actually not use the abbreviation CRA. I should just say Cyber Resiliency Act and then have the abbreviation as a secondary item. Of course, just 3 letters. All right. And in that case, we can just add a rider saying suppliers should be aware of potentially including processes. Government such as the states. White House executive order. I can't really use an abbreviation for the US here because USA NTIA starts to get really long. Oh, just NTIA is okay. I haven't heard anyone else use that agency. I have heard of other countries with White Houses. Did you know in Korea it's called the Blue House, interestingly?
I did not know that.
There you go. I think in Ireland it's probably called the Old House Falling Down in a Park. He says. For those of you who got shocked, Ireland's my country. I can say anything about it. Uh, yeah, I think this might do it. What do you think? It's a bit verbose, but it seems to capture all of the major regulation in one sentence.
Yeah, it looks good.
Yeah. I'm not closing this issue because I'll have to put in a note when I merge it properly. Okay. In that case, issue 66, I think. Yep. So comment. Boom. Done. Yeah, we have one. This is an interesting one. This is purely commentary, but important commentary. Steve noted that the leaflet seems very long, and he thinks there's scope for something much shorter and punchier. Now, this is very normative on my part. I agree, but I think the full-length one is useful for someone to sit down and study. On the other hand, I think he's right. Maybe we could have the full-length leaflet and then using the leaflet exactly create like an info sheet. What do you think?
I was going to bring that up once we work through the issues, but I'm glad that Steve brought this up as an issue. I noticed in the, is the desire to move to a markdown format or to stay in a leaflet PDF format because it refers to itself kind of cyclically saying, this pamphlet, this leaflet, and it, it gets away a little bit from the material itself to the format of the material. So
Mm,
if the desire is to move to Markdown and move to GitHub completely to have traceability of the content, it might need to be broken down into individual sections a little bit, but that goes away from the spirit of a leaflet.
it's a really good point. Hypothetically, then, if we remove the sections referring to pamphlet and leaflet, just excise those, keep the focus on the content, it really becomes just a refactoring issue to make sure that the sections are very clearly defined. And I'm going to pull up the original document in leaflet form to underline this. So in this one, it kind of wanders through the different sections, and each section on its own can be individually constrained. So maybe if we remove self-references to being a leaflet, we focus on the modularity, and of course, Markdown being our single source of truth, then it would simply be a case of the modules can be taken and put into a leaflet, but the focus is only on the content which is modular and works all together in a flow if you so wish, or you can just take a piece and run. What do you think?
Yeah, it would make it a lot easier to, go through these pull requests if it was in that
Right.
format.
Because then you'd
But
cite section only. Yeah.
right, right. But on the flip side, like, what does the end user want? What's the end user experience that we're going for here?
And the user experience in terms of the supply chain has definitely in the Far East been here's an attachment that explains what we're talking about. Have at it. So it's definitely been a form of here's a formatted, prepared single attachment. Read this, and then we'll continue our procurement discussion, which I suppose is a way of saying that if if we remove the self-references to leaflet and we make it modular, still the primary use case will be a formatted version sent by email as attachment to suppliers that will then open it and in countries like Japan, physically print it and read it with their team.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah. Is it possible then that at the very beginning of the document, maybe around the introduction, we have a note in the markdown, uh, instead of just assuming it's a pamphlet, to say something like, this material has been created to work as uh, a combined, or this material has been created to work as a whole, formatted as a pamphlet, but is also designed to be modular and can be used section by section or however people wish, something like that. And that way authors would see once, oh, it was designed to be a pamphlet originally. And as we mess with the modules, we should not break the narrative. We should think of it as a finished combined work in potential. And then people can take that and make a leaflet out of it. But equally so, our editing would then be, I'm editing, learning open source software section, blah, blah, blah. Would that resolve the issue?
Maybe. It would
Yes.
be really nice if there was just a git build pamphlet option, but unfortunately there's not.
Oh, I hope the day comes where we just tell the AI, take this markdown and make me a beautiful pamphlet with diagrams.
Yeah,
That
it might be sooner rather than later.
Right? I was trawling a friend the other day. This is a slight digression from a supplier education leaflet, but it will feed into our work. I was trawling a friend of mine the other day from Inner Mongolia, and she likes kaiju. So I asked AI to make a picture of, an angry kaiju flying from the moon, landing in the ocean, splashing people with water, and because she likes kaiju, her running towards it to go see what's going on because it looks fun. And it made loads of options and it was brilliant. And this incredibly is coming back to OpenChain education material now, in that we actually have 8 test case studies done by AI last year, which I have to come back to and bring into these calls. And last year, the AI did mediocre, but not terribly bad, as in a bit boring, but not needing too much correction, simple case studies around ISO 5230. And that seems to indicate we're getting really close to being able to go from blank page to acceptable starting point on future materials. So we're really close.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
It's so groovy, right? In fact, those case studies, I will be bringing that to the table, hopefully in collaboration with our chairs for this particular what would you call it? For this particular work group, uh, where maybe we can do something in the near future. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna put in the chat adoption case studies. Yeah. I'm gonna put in the chat the actual material that I just referenced, and I'm gonna share it. And because I do want to take this into future versions of this leaflet, I want to be able to use AI to play with some of this stuff. I think we're getting really close. So, each one of these is about a company using OpenChain, and they're short, they're not great, but they're a good starting point. And I think that that's going to be useful for us in the future. But back to the situation at
Okay.
hand. Sorry?
Oh, go right ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Back to the situation at hand. Yeah. Is it long overall? Yes. Can we go for a shortened version? Absolutely. Can we make it more modular? Yes. So I guess the answer here would be, um, let's look at 2 things. There. So this is the known use case. Okay. In some areas like Japan. And then there is the known use case of all right. So yeah, known use case of the single attachment leaflet format, good. But there is a known use case of people liking quick infographics or small handouts. So if we look at the text as being potentially more modular and the modules being refinable, then maybe refactoring would be good is the answer. What do you think?
Yeah, and I'm happy to maybe put some ideas in there rather than just feedback. So I'm happy to issue a pull request if that's helpful.
That's more than helpful. Bad news. I just volunteered you.
No problem. Yep.
Boom. Thanks, Jacob. That's actually awesome because one problem with getting assistance from AIs has been the sheer size of some text. But if we're dealing with modules, we can potentially start to move over to an AI-assisted authorship over time, which may or may not be useful in the context of where we're going, but it could be, and it would be nice to move from a monolithic block of text. Well, it's not totally monolithic. It is split into sections, but into something that's easier for people to either work on individually or work on with the help of AI or translate just a bit of it. If you're in, let's say, China, you translate one piece of this leaflet and you work on that without having to think, oh gosh, I've got to translate 2,500 words. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Makes it a lot more sizable and
Right.
just a better organization for community.
Absolutely. And I'd love if people can increasingly take our markdown and just go do stuff with it, whatever it is, remix it, whatever. It's all public domain. Well, CC0. Last one. Uh, ooh, this issue title needs fixing. Oh, I haven't submitted the new issue. Right, there we go. Okay. This one refers to a certain part. Okay, he's not sure whether a certain section of it has a certain meaning. But to look at that, I think it's going to involve reading through the section and pondering it. So I actually suggest we do that another day, or at least we do it async. What do you think? Or do you want to do it now? We can do it now. It's up to you. I'll just look at the scale of it.
Yeah. I'm just rereading it here.
Oh, apologies. I'll put the section in here. I'll just put it in the chat and I'll pull it out of the actual document and put it in the issue down here. Hmm. Where's that gone? Did I close the issue? Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. He's not sure if that section says people can share modifications or gain access to modifications or both. Okay. Oh, I should read this out in case there's non-native speakers that take a while to read. Okay, so this is reciprocal licenses, the GPL, LGPL, AGPL, and Mozilla Public License require disclosure of the source code for the associated software. The license and the copyright in the source code must not be removed. If the distributor has modified the source code, then all source code modifications must also be disclosed. Reciprocal licenses aim to foster an environment where people can share modifications and improvements among all users and developers of the software. In addition to the disclosure of the source code, these licenses generally require other obligations to be met as well. To distribute software under a reciprocal license, you must understand these obligations. If needed, you should consult with your legal and intellectual property staff. Actually, I don't see any clarity issue there.
Yeah, my interpretation of this is similar to our first comment where do we want to define what open source license is, like an acceptable open source license list? This
Right.
is, do we want to define what a reciprocal license is? And in this case, I think it is pretty definitive. There's not multiple bodies which provide examples of reciprocal licenses. It's either allows modification or not. So it seems more direct than our first issue.
Yeah, it does. You're right. It really does. I guess then the question I have is there any lack of clarity in that? You know, Steve read it as I'm not sure if the reciprocal licenses section should say it means people can share the modifications or gain access to the modifications or both. I think it basically says what it needs to already. I'm not sure it should make any further statement that, you know, you can share the modifications. In a greater way than it does here. You know, saying if you modify the code, then the modifications must be disclosed. I don't think there's anything else to say about that without straying into now I'm telling you what the GPL does or the AGPL does. So, you know, you could add in some cases even using web apps, and that's basically AGPL. But do we need to go down that rabbit hole? I think we probably have gone far enough. So I guess what I'm saying is I think maybe the current format is clear enough, but I'm not sure. What do you think?
I agree with you.
Just for fun, uh, let's do our first, yeah, let's do our first co-pilot here and see if, okay, let's see if we can make it simpler for non-native English speakers. I noticed that the language structures are quite um, quite formal in the current leaflet. And I wonder if we'd benefit from potentially simplifying the language as well. Uh, of course, the AI made errors. It tried to change the term reciprocal licenses, but let's forget that.
Yeah, and the sentence create a place where everyone can share. Like place seems like a problematic term.
Right.
I don't know if this is the best use or the best output from the AI.
Yep. So I guess the answer is, could it be simpler? Yes. Can the AI do it today? No.
Yep.
All right. Okay. I'm just going to make a note here that this section looks okay, but language. All right. So I put a note in here and left it open that we don't think it needs to say more than it currently says, but it would benefit from being made simpler and clearer.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's fair. And one potential remix. Apologies, there's an air conditioner now cleaning itself in my study. I'm going to move to another room. My air conditioners are that earlier time when everything was not labeled AI, but they have a mind of their own and they do all kinds of self-cleaning and things, occasionally at the most inopportune moments. Uh,
It sounded fine to me. It didn't sound like there was a lot of background noise. So,
really? Oh, it was
yep.
horrifically loud. That's amazing. So the robot was beaten by the laptop's internal noise processing. The future of machine fighting machine. Okay. Yeah. Honestly, I think I can rework this, but I can rework this async so that it doesn't take up time on this call, because I need to look at each sentence and flow to do it. It's going to take a few minutes, and I don't want to make this call super boring.
Yep, I agree.
In that case, we've covered all the issues. We merged his pull request into the leaflet. I'm just going to put a link to the leaflet in your issue. Boom. And I'll just make a note. Can't believe it's February 27th. My goodness. Okay, oh, I think it's 26th in your part of the world. I live in the future.
It's okay.
Okay.
We get an extra day this year.
Yeah, we do. That's it. That's incredible. I'd forgotten it was a leap year. We've actually then essentially either resolved or addressed 4 different issues. So we had a pull request with typos, and then Steve had kindly made 5 comments. Improvement for typical open source licenses, references to CRA, Biden, White House, and so on. The leaflet seems long. Could we make it punchier? Reciprocal licenses section, and then an NTIA section. And I think we've covered everything pretty well. My outstanding action is to work on the reciprocal license language and then potentially merge that. And your outstanding action is to have a look at modularity, getting rid of this leaflet, this pamphlet bit, or at least having a quick look and determining what you think
Yeah.
about. Awesome.
Yeah, no problem. I'll do that.
Jacob, it's been a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for helping go through this. It's really, really good.
Yeah, always fun.
Have a beautiful evening, and I will talk with you soon.
Yep. Cheers.
Take care.